Hello, welcome back to Grim and Whim. On today's episode, we're going to be looking at 3 Reddit stories, and they are all about road trip woes. And without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into the first story. Our first story is entitled, Never Sleep in Your Car on a Road Trip. I'm from Connecticut. I was in a long-distance relationship with a girl from Georgia and would often make road trips down to visit her. I don't really mind. I love road trips. I've driven across the United States and back, all on my own. There's just something about traveling the highways of the US by yourself that is just so freeing. To save money, I would sleep in my car. It's not so bad. It's basically camping in a metal tent. It makes you feel like you're really roughing it. I just recline the seat back, keep the key in the ignition, and doze off. No, I don't put anything up to block the windows for privacy. Maybe I should have. The trip down south is a comfortable 2-day drive. My stop would usually be somewhere along the Virginia-North Carolina border. So for my previous trip, that's exactly where I stopped that night. Rest stops were often less trafficked and thus quieter than truck stops. Normally, I would have stopped at a Love's, but I was so tired that I settled for the first rest stop I saw. It was oddly vacant that night, with only a couple lone cars sitting forlorn under the amber street lamps. Most likely, travelers with the same idea as myself. I pulled into a parking spot away from the others, under the shadow of a tree and far from the street lamps. I figured I would have more privacy there, as opposed to being bathed in light. So I did my usual thing, locked my doors, opened the window just a hair for ventilation, kept my key in, and reclined the seat and went to sleep. I was never interrupted on any of these car camping nights, so I never suspected anything on this one. Then a sharp tap woke me up. At first, I thought I heard it in my dream. I opened my eyes a bit confused. Since I leaned back, I was facing the ceiling and couldn't see anything. I hear another tap, like a tiny object hitting a hard surface. It came in an irregular rhythm. Was it raining? Was water dripping onto my windshield? I'm under a tree, so maybe something fell from the branches. Maybe a squirrel or a bird dropped something. What if a squirrel was climbing around my car? Or what if it wasn't an animal? The thought occurred to me that it might very well be a person poking around outside. What did they want? Were the doors locked? Yes, the keys were in the ignition. I can leave in an instant. Still, I lay there, completely still, pretending to be asleep, pretending I hadn't heard anything, hoping whoever it was that they would leave me alone. It was better to not find out. I was too afraid to find out. It was better to stay here in blissful ignorance. Still, the tapping continued. I had to do something. There was no way I was just going to stay there. I had to look. My heart was pounding at that moment. It was deafening. Whoever was out there could probably hear it. I decided I was going to look. I was going to raise my head up and see what was making that noise. So that's what I did. What met my eyes sent a jolt through my entire body. Every muscle fiber locked up in pure shock at what I saw. The faint glow of the street lamps cast just enough light for me to make out what I was looking at. There in the windshield, staring directly at me, was a face. Someone, I presumed to be a woman, was lying on my hood, her face pressed up against my windshield. Her face was completely still, locked in a permanent grin. I froze in overwhelming terror. The eyes I stared into appeared to have rolled back, showing only the whites. The nose was turned up, pressed painfully into the glass. The lips stretched wide, revealing horrid, rotten teeth. Even in the darkness, I could tell her skin was sickly pale, contrasting to her long, filthy black hair. Whoever this was, she was clearly not in her right mind. I don't know how long I sat there, but I was too afraid to move. Finally, I got a grip on myself and shot my hand to the ignition. It turned over, making, in that instant, the most beautiful sound I ever heard. For a split second, I was afraid I might be caught in a horror movie scenario, the one where the car won't crank as the killer approaches. I reversed as fast as I could, trying not to give this creeper time to try anything. In my panic, I remember activating the windshield wipers in a futile attempt to get her off. Was I about to drive out of here with some wacko holding onto my hood? Thankfully, I didn't have to worry about that, because as soon as I stopped, the woman leapt off, landing on all fours. Seeing my opportunity, I shifted into drive and gunned it right as I saw her reaching for the driver's side door. With my foot on the gas, I sped out of the parking lot. Behind me, I heard her let out a piercing shriek like that of an animal. I looked in my rearview mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw her chasing me, running on all fours, her black hair swinging wildly around her. I couldn't get a good look as I rounded a curve in the road, leading out of the rest stop and merged with the highway. There, I picked up speed and drove through the night. I did not stop again until I saw the morning light. The next story was actually a comment on a Reddit post, and the post was asking, "What is your scariest road trip experience?" And this post had the following story. I was in the USAF, stationed in Omaha in the late 80s. At the time, I hung out with my roommate and another friend. My name is Tracy, and my roommate's name was Tracy. The girl we hung out with was named Stacy. When we were together, everyone always thought that we were lying, and being the silly teenagers we were, we always found it funny. One weekend, we decided to take a trip to Kansas City, Missouri. We were speeding down the highway, laughing and singing at the top of our lungs. We were happy and having the time of our lives. Stacy was driving, and she had a bit of a lead foot and must have been going too fast because before long, a state trooper pulled up behind us and turned on its lights. Stacy immediately pulled over. By the time the officer made it to her window, she had already had her license and registration in hand, and the window was open. The officer looked at her, and then looked at me, and then Tracy, and he said, "I want you to follow me. Don't try to run off, or you will all be going to jail." He then went and got back in his car. Needless to say, the three of us were puzzled and talking amongst ourselves, wondering why he didn't just take Stacy's identification and write her a ticket. The officer pulled out slowly, and we dropped in behind him and followed him down the road. He drove a few miles and exited the highway. He drove a little ways, and then turned onto a dirt road that was surrounded by stalks of corn. We all stopped talking as we became more alarmed. However, being young, scared, and since he was a police officer, we did continue to follow him. The officer drove for some time down this dirt road and then pulled into an area that had a big, beat-up old barn. As he stopped, and as we stopped behind him, a group of men with shotguns exited the barn. It wasn't until that point did we realize we were in mortal danger, and panic set in. The officer walked back to our car and told Stacy, to get out and follow him to his car. As she got out, she looked at me and Tracy, and there was sheer terror on her face. She followed him to his car, and he motioned for her to get into the passenger side, and she did. Tracy and I were crying, and as the armed men stood on the side of the car looking at us, we began quietly praying for God to protect the three of us. We prayed that Stacy wasn't being hurt somehow, and maybe they would just let us leave. After some minutes, Stacy bolted out of the officer's car and ran back to the car and jumped in the driver's seat. She was crying hysterically, so of course, Tracy and I began crying harder. The officer got out of his car and walked back to our car, this time to Tracy's window, as she was in the front passenger seat. He asked, "Is it true that all y'all are in the Air Force?" To which Tracy replied, "Yes, sir." The officer calmly said, "Get out of here and go back to where y'all came from. I better not see you guys again." As soon as he finished, Stacy turned on the car, whipped it around, and sped back down the dirt road. She somehow navigated us back to the highway. As she drove down towards the base, the silence was only broken by an occasional sob from one of us. Stacy drove for a while, and as soon as we crossed back into Nebraska, she pulled over on the side of the highway. Then she began to sob heavily. Tracy and I hugged her and asked if she was hurt in any way. She shook her head no. She wasn't hurt. After she calmed down enough, she told us what happened in the police car. After she got into the car, she offered the officer her identification and told him that she was sorry for speeding. He took her information and then asked her, "What are you doing with those?" And I'm not going to say the word. Let's just say it's a racial slur for African American people. And I'm sure you can guess, because it is the South, what word it could have been. Stacy was white. She explained that we were on a road trip. He then told her if she would do certain favors for him, and he might just let us go with a warning. At that, Stacy had a complete meltdown. I guess while he was waiting for her to calm down, he finally looked at her identification and saw that she had also given him her military ID. He asked if we were all in the military, and between sobs, she said that we were. He asked where we were stationed, and she told him Offutt AFB. He then told her to go back to her car. As we sat there, after Stacy told us what happened, I think it hit all of us at the same time that the only thing that saved us was that we were in the military and stationed at a nearby base. We hugged each other and cried until we could not cry anymore. We didn't report what happened. Again, we were teenagers and didn't think we would be believed over a law enforcement officer. We never talked about it after that day. That incident has haunted me for years, all of the what ifs. But as I have gotten older, what haunts me more is the thought that others may not have been as lucky as we were. The final story was on that same Reddit thread, and we're going to just hop right into it. I used to make the 400-mile trek from Fairbanks to Anchorage and 400 miles back several times every winter. I was stupid. The scariest time was when the heater went out in my '82 Mercury Zephyr. I hadn't pizza boxed the radiator, so of course it never got warm. And in the negative 30-degree weather, everything wound up freezing in the coolant and heater lines. The car iced up on the inside and was getting colder and colder. We made it to one of the 2 gas stations on the route, and it had a bunch of sternness on clearance, so we figured that that would be able to keep us warm in the car and defrost the windshield. I scraped off enough ice to see forward through the windshield. Then we put 4 Sternis on the dashboard and lit them, turning on the defrost fan, and then hit the road. They started to thaw the ice of the windshield, and about 15 miles up the road, the windshield exploded. I am not exaggerating. Exploded like a bomb. Apparently, the very hot inside and very cold outside layers of the windshield didn't agree with each other and decided to just explode in our face at 50 miles per hour. We slid off the road into the snow and took stock of our situation. Midnight. 15 miles hike back to the closest man-made anything, negative 30 degrees outside, the car's not working, and we're halfway into the snowbank off of the road. This is how people have died in the middle of nowhere. I was prepping to try and make the hike back to the gas station and call for help when another buddy happened to be coming by in his old Dodge van and took us the rest of the way to Fairbanks. I am not sure we would have made the hike back to the gas station without freezing. So a little thing about me, I am not an outdoorsy type of girl. I walk my dog, outside, but I don't really hike or mountain climb or do anything outdoorsy really. I'm very much a homebody. So this entire situation sounds like an absolute nightmare to me. The idea of being stranded somewhere, it's very cold, you have to hike to the nearest man-made location, and it's like 15 miles away. That just sounds like awful to me. But it sounds like this person, he or she or whoever, does this a lot. So I guess they're a little bit more well-versed in, challenging nature experiences. But yeah, this does not sound like a fun time at all. So I'm very happy to be indoors where I feel like my kind belong, I'm very much like a hobbit. If I have to get thrust into an adventure, so be it, but I'm very much an indoor kind of gal, so that's all. Thank you so much for joining me. It's goodbye for now, but I hope to haunt you again soon.